That was a nice segue. I hate using that, I don't mean to use that American term. So I don't think we can talk about the climate emergency without talking about nature, the natural environment, and land, how we make use of our land. So nature and land are inextricably linked, we can't get away from that, so I think that's really helpful to have just heard from a local land use perspective there. And of course, we're not just in a climate emergency, we're also facing an ecological emergency. These are absolutely interlinked. And there is a little bit of danger, and I don't want to put too much of a sideways, but if we just focus solely on energy and carbon, I can imagine a low carbon world which is functionally dead. If we lose our pollinators and our ruin our water systems, we're screwed, right? So we have to look at these things together. Happily, they work much better when we think of them together anyway. I just put that out, I don't know if some of you might have seen this, these are the sort of planetary boundaries, this idea of that we're overshooting. It's not just our carbon stock, but it's also nitrogen cycles, land use, biodiversity, etc. So these things are all very much interrelated. I think that's well understood. So this comes right back to land use and good, responsible land stewardship. Happily, without sounding too perverse when we're talking about climate emergency, responsible land use has a really powerful carbon story, but also nature recovery story. So I think we all know that trees store carbon. There's my tree reference. The rest of it's not so much about trees. We know that, we learn that at school. Perhaps what we don't know, so we're not so aware of, is that at least half, varies from species to species, but at least half of the carbon captured by a tree is actually stored in the soil. And a similar story for vegetation elsewhere. So you can ignore the wider numbers there. But it's not, trees are great in terms of capturing, storing carbon. So are our, unimproved grasslands. Peatlands, salt marsh is one of the highest carbon storage that we have actually in the natural world. So all these things are called as, termed as natural climate solutions. But the key point there I want to leave you with, in the Frome context maybe, is the importance of soil. And every time we disturb soil, we're releasing carbon. So without being too, we've got to be pragmatic with that, but that has a huge, obviously, linkage then when we're thinking about sustainable agriculture. So natural climate solutions are, absolutely key to the climate response. A recent global study indicated that 37% of the emissions reductions we need globally to stay below 2 degrees of warming could be achieved by natural climate solutions. That's huge. They receive 3% of the global funding. So there's a really disproportionate response. We know that there's great sort of natural technology there, but we're not focusing enough on it. The other key side to this, which again we're not focusing on enough, is the role of a healthy natural environment in enabling us to be resilient and adapt to a fast-changing climate. And a 2 degrees warmer world is only 20 years away. That's not far. And I think we'll have, we'll see much fewer impacts than the rest of the world, really. But even here in Frome, we'll see, flash flooding, heat waves, and so on. So we've got to have some real honest discussions about how do we best prepare our spaces and best adapt to this issue. In the case of trees, again, and these are some wider, we call it, the jargon is ecosystem services, the multiple benefits of the natural environment. Trees, just talking about trees, they're excellent at flood protection, they obviously cool our urban streets and so on, provide, ecological corridors through the town. So we have to talk about adaptation and resilience as well as carbon, storage, and also decarbonisation of our economy. All these three aspects are all really important. Again, the Committee on Climate Change, which advises government, their latest report on adaptation headline was basically that we're really behind in our adaptation planning as a country, which is quite scary. We're quite good on the waterfront, but we're pretty poor on our land use front. So again, this stuff will really affect our own lives and the kind of economic fabric of Frome. So we really have to forward think of these issues. So in response to this challenge, there are increasing conversations about, okay, well, how do we have some really honest discussions about okay, this is how, we don't know all the impacts of climate change. I think the most predictable aspect of climate change is its unpredictability. But we have to have some honest conversations about how is land going to change, where will current farming no longer be viable, for example, and then where are how do we best make use of our land for food growing, for carbon storage, energy generation, our own development needs, and so on. And in some cases, those land uses will be integrated. So we heard about sort of nature-friendly farming earlier. There's also this concept of agroforestry, which is introducing, woodland into the farming systems more. You can generate energy. Solar farms can be integrated with grazing and so on. So these are not always tensions, but we have to have some honest conversations about these. And I think this also reflects, not talking about Frome, but just a wider kind of culturally, or in the UK, we're not really able to imagine just how much things are going to change. And I think it's really helpful if we did a visioning exercise of, okay, well, these are the trends that we know are going to happen. How do we best make use of our land and our places and plan for those in a way that we can thrive, survive and thrive in this context. So these images are from the Wildlife Trust, so they've done a Wilder Britain campaign. So these are just images from those. And I think it's just helpful to kind of imagine positively what wilder spaces could look like. So that's capturing a lot of carbon, but it's also making our places much more livable, making them more resilient to flooding and so on. So I guess just my reflection on, what is in the people of Frome's gift or ability to really think about how do we influence land use and how do we really promote better use and funding of natural climate solutions. So yes, there's one thing in the town of Frome, obviously, how do we protect, through policy and steward or care for, with our own hands, what we already have, so that's trees, but also our green spaces, and, the nature within them, so, even in our river systems or whatever, but also how do we set aside use space for nature, and that could be at all scales, it could be in our gardens, it could be on, larger scale, both growing and rewilding. But also, as consumers, we've heard earlier about, the products that we're using and the waste hierarchy and so on. We can extrapolate that same thinking to, how are we investing? Perhaps inadvertently our pension pots are supporting deforestation in the Amazon. Have we looked into that? How can our procurement policies be supporting, FSC certified timber, for example? So there's a lot that we can do as consumers and investors. And that's potentially got a larger impact, actually, than what we can do within Frome. But what we do within Frome is obviously key to making our town as livable as possible. And obviously it's supporting nature-friendly farming as well. And the final thing that I just add, I was at a workshop earlier this morning about, it was about, the importance of good metaphors and the importance of metaphor in the climate and ecological emergency at the Schumacher Institute in Bristol. And one thing that really struck me, we were talking about neuroscience, so I think there's so much language about emergency, and that's, clearly we are in an emergency, and we mustn't, step down on that. But what I thought was really powerful, that apparently awe is the counterbalance to fear in terms of how our fight or flight responds. So I just, don't just kind of go head and hands, or, oh, what are we going to do in an emergency, in a crisis? Go out and, go for a beautiful walk in the woodlands, or go for a sunrise walk, or whatever. It's so important for our own sanity, and just psychologically that all counterbalances that fear and enables us to act positively together.
Brilliant, thanks Heather. I forgot to put in the inspiring slide, so I'm really glad that Heather because normally the last two ones we said, right, it's 2030, we've made our targets, we have zero carbon, we've created amazing spaces for nature, we have amazing flourishing local food systems that are sustainable, we're not buying all this stuff that's transported around the world, we've made it, and the question is, how have we done it? So the next, so probably about 15 minutes per group-ish. And there are different, these tables will be exploring the impacts of goods and services. The middle lot are looking at how do we sort of reduce or eliminate even the concept of waste. And the final group will be looking at how do we reduce the impact of food and land use. And then I'll ring an annoying bell every 15 minutes and you can swap around and discuss some of the different issues. And then we'll have feedback at the end.